which created separate spheres, the sphere of home and the sphere of work. The notion, Kelly, that emerged was that in the sphere of work, men dominated. Right? In the sphere of work, men dominated. In the sphere of home, women dominated. Now, that meant that women were ultimately in charge of the home. And it became, the notion of the cult of domesticity sort of venerates the position of wife and mother as the head or the center of the home. And the responsibility of the wife and the mother to provide for a calm, safe, nurturing home. Now, if you think about it, the cult of domesticity connects to women's involvement in reform movements. Because women made a safe, nurturing, calm, fair home, they could sort of transpose that to society. So the cult of domesticity is a big deal, and you can read about that in your textbook. You can also read about the transportation revolution in your textbook. In terms of the transportation revolution, remember, it moves in kind of waves. Turnpikes and roads, canals, and finally culminates with the most enduring form of transportation, which is what, maybe? Railroads, right? So by the time of the Civil War, the canal era is over, the rail era is dominating, and railroads connect, Kelly, more often east to west, right? Now, we also talked about the revivals, or the reform element of the time period. And reform will include about 8 questions on your test. When we talked about reform, we said that reform was this notion that society could be improved. And we said that it had a couple of reservoirs or impulses. Why did people want to fix the worst defects in society during this period, during the age of reform, the 1830s, 1840s? We said that one of the reasons they wanted to fix things, Thomas, was because they felt that things were broken. The Industrial Revolution, the market revolution of the time represented dramatic changes, westward expansion, Jacksonian democracy. These are things that were disconcerting for lots of people, and as a result, they saw problems that connected to them, and they wanted to fix them. But they were also optimistic, right? That society could be better. And that optimism, bubbled up from kind of 2 impulses, revivalism and romanticism. And we talked about romanticism being this idea that the world can be a better place, right? And we said ideologically, we connected romanticism to transcendentalism. And we mentioned transcendentalism as a spiritual, religious, literary, philosophical movement that sort of suggested that God was in everyone. And that it was humans' sort of destiny and fate, and it should be their desire to cultivate the divinity within. And that humans were worth improving, and therefore society was worth bettering. And we talked about sort of the transcendental ideology. Now, we identified 2 pretty prominent transcendentalists. We talked about Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. What work did we associate with Thoreau? What work did we associate with Thoreau? Yes. Civil disobedience. Good. Now, we also talked about the Second Great Awakening. And the Second Great Awakening, what are you doing? If you are not talking about history, return to your seat immediately. What is he doing, maybe? What is he telling you? What's he saying? With history. With mathematics.
Yeah.
With physics. Yeah. Return to your seat. What kind of a sick mind, Thomas, would talk about physics in the middle of an advanced placement, even Farron would not do such a diabolical thing. I mean, what kind of world do we live in? I mean, yes, well, anyways, I'm glad you're back, Jason. Now, it will only take a moment, and then you can chat with maybe about physics in more depth and in more detail. Because we wanted to mention the Second Great Awakening, and we said that the Second Great Awakening was a religious movement, right, that emphasized the individual autonomy to choose salvation. Remember, we said the Second Great Awakening was this spiritual religious movement that offered to the masses the possibility of choosing salvation, of choosing to accept a salvation that would transform your life. Now, we said that those people who were converted to evangelical Christianity as a result of the Second Great Awakening were frequently inspired to join reform movements to try to fix the worst defects in society. And we said that the Second Great Awakening was a source of inspiration for the reforms of the period. And the reforms that we talked about, and will be on the test, are prohibition or temperance. And we talked a little bit about temperance, the temperance movement. We mentioned somebody by the name of Neil Dow when we talked about temperance. Anybody remember who that was? Neil Dow, D-O-W? His role? Anybody besides Meredith and myself? We only mentioned it. Go ahead then. Right. He is a prohibitionist in Maine, and he is largely credited with a prohibition law in Maine that prohibited the distribution and manufacture of alcohol. Now remember, we said there was a difference between prohibition and temperance. Temperance was controlling how much was people would drink, and prohibition was prohibiting them from drinking, right? And so, we talked a little bit about that. We also talked about treatment of the mentally ill and Dorothea Dix, and there may be a question or two on the test about that. There also may be a question on the test about the Mormons, right? About the Mormons. The Mormons were a religious movement that, that was part of this period. And there is a little discussion in your text about the Mormons and other religious sects that were considered to be maybe off the mainstream, right? And so you might want to look for that in your text as well. All right. I hit a couple of things that are things that we didn't talk about that might be in your text. But you want to read chapter 16. Make sure you read chapter 16. Try to study it as best you can, and we'll just sort of go from there. All right. So tomorrow we'll have the test. Felix will put this onto YouTube, and so you can watch this in the comfort of your home if you like. Thank you for attending. Thank you. Ongoing.